Your eyes on the times, you walk ready to speak up. But with so many problems, you're exhausted trying to keep up.
This is the Church Politics Podcast, where you can get political commentary from a biblical worldview. We're not trying to be conservative or progressive. We're trying to be Christian in the public square.
And I'm black as heaven. I'm made in God's image. Nobody can change my settings. Hey man, got off my knees and put an end to my search. It's easy to sell your soul when you don't know what it's worth.
What you know, good and Camp, you're listening to the And Campaign's Church Politics Podcast with Justin Gibney, a.k.a. Bishop Cooper's grandson. And that's it. It's just me. Chris is not here. I'm not going to play with you. He didn't get fired this time. I'm not even going to joke like that. But it is just me. This is actually a bonus episode. And I'll be honest with you. Usually we save the bonus episodes for our Patreon folks. So they get a bonus episode every week. But since I missed the interview that Chris did earlier this week, I'm going to just give y'all a bonus episode because I think there's some things that need to be addressed. And I don't want to leave y'all without, a whole week without addressing some of those things. So it's a bonus episode. It's just me. Chris has already done his work for the week. So I can't make him, come back and do this. But I figured I'd holler at y'all for a little bit. It'll be a mini episode. It probably won't be the whole 40, 30 minutes. But I do have some things that I want to talk about. Now, before I get into it, I got to say this. And this, I just want to be straight up with you. There is no doubt in my mind that when you get to the Elite Eight of March Madness, once you get to that point, there's no doubt in my mind that the women's game is more entertaining than the men's basketball game. You can be mad at me. You can, I ain't in the war of the sexes, none of that stuff. Just based off entertainment value, really just based off, and I hate to say this, really just based off of name recognition and people that use star power, right? I'll be straight up with you. Back in the day, there was a time where I felt like I knew, especially when it got to like the Sweet 16, I knew the names of most of the guys on most of the starters on every team in the men's game. It's come to the point, though, to be straight up, that I know more of the women's names than the men. So when we get to that Elite Eight, I'm more entertained by the women's game than I am by the men's game. I know some of y'all saw that, and by the time you hear this, some of the other games may have happened. But I know some of y'all saw that Iowa LSU game, and it was fun to watch. It was great basketball. For whatever reason, that doesn't normally transfer over into the WNBA. But for the women's game, man, it's just more exciting. Now, I say when it gets to the Elite Eight because I still think that there's a lack of parity in women's college basketball. So, like, you have some really good teams, like in the top 10, 12. But further out, like that's full 64, it's just not a lot of parity. The men tend, in my opinion, to have more parity. But at this moment in the game, the college basketball, men's college basketball just doesn't have as many guys with the name recognition and the star power. And it just is what it is. So I appreciate, those sisters for all the work that they put in, the hard work. I'm glad that they're getting some recognition in that respect, but you can't take nothing away from them, man. Those were some really good games and I enjoyed watching it. I don't, when you get older, and I know y'all understand this, you start working, you got a lot more stuff to do. You got to pick and choose which sports you follow. So when it comes to sports, I mainly follow college football, the NFL, and then the NBA a little bit. College basketball, men's and women's, kind of fell off my plate. I just don't have the time to keep up. But certainly I got to watch March Madness, right? So that's totally different. So I don't keep up during the year. March Madness comes and, I still got to do a bracket now because if I don't do a bracket, then I can't trash talk. And so I do a lot of guesswork on my bracket, but it still gives me the opportunity to trash talk and have fun. And let me tell you, if you want to talk about a busted bracket, I was probably 2 days in and it was over for me, but it adds to the entertainment. I don't know. There aren't too many things in sports that are better than those first 2 days of March Madness. Even if you don't know the teams, just doing a bracket, seeing what's happened, hearing about the upsets is always fun. So had to get that out, man. I hope y'all are enjoying. It's April now, but I hope y'all enjoyed your March Madness. We're gonna see who wins these championships. But good for the love of sports. And so, keep doing that. Keep up as much as you can, but give propers where propers are due. Women's college basketball is doing its thing right now, and I hope that continues. Well, you know what it is, man. As always, I want to give a shout out to all my patrons and supporters for supporting us in what we do and how we do it. We would not have a Church Politics podcast if it wasn't for the people who are supporting us. So I appreciate you. If you are watching on YouTube, be sure to like and subscribe and become a patron. So you can go to patreon.com/churchpolitics. And if you become a monthly giver, as I said earlier, you will get not just this bonus episodes, but you'll get a bonus episode pretty much every week. And it's worth it, man. We put a lot of work into that. And it's information that y'all need, man. But we got to make sure that we can grow, that we can market, that we can expand. And the only way to do that is through your contribution. So everybody who considers that, we greatly appreciate it. So you know what it is, my people. Grab your Bible, get your mind right, and prepare to think, not like a Republican, not like a Democrat, but to think like a Christian. Now, I want to start this episode with scripture, as usual. You guys should be used to that. That's what we try to do when we can. And so let's do that this time too. I want to go to 2 Corinthians chapter 8, verse 21. 2 Corinthians chapter 8, verse 21, which says, "For we are taking pains to do what is right, not only in the eyes of the Lord, but also in the eyes of men." We are taking pains to do what is right, not only in the eyes of God, but in the eyes of man. Taking pains. That means not only do we do what's right when it's convenient or when it's easy, it means we're going out of our way to do what's right. That we're going to do what's right, even when it's inconvenient or embarrassing, or for whatever reason, we just don't want to do it. The Christian must take pains to do what is right in the eyes of God and man. And what that means to me, folks, is that in one sense, we have to be transparent. That's how I'm applying it to what I'm about to talk to now. That we need to take pains to make sure that we are clear. And the AND campaign, I think, since the beginning, has made transparency a major part of what we do. We want to interact. We want to engage with the utmost integrity so that when we say something, you can believe it. So that when we take a stance, we took that stance, whether we're right or we're wrong, right? We get some things wrong, but we took that stance based on intellectual honesty and based on a level of adherence to scripture, right? Does it mean we always get that right? No, of course not. But we do want to make that effort. And I think transparency is so big. And I'll be honest with you, transparency is so easy to put to the side when it's inconvenient. But if the AND campaign is going to critique others, if we're going to hold others to a standard, if I'm going to sit here and talk about how certain politicians aren't who they say they are, or aren't representing who they say they're representing, or have ulterior motives, if I'm going to sit here and say that, then I better well be holding myself to that standard or a higher standard. If I'm going to say, hey, I don't know if you should believe what that person says because that person's veracity is questionable, or that person doesn't have a full commitment to the truth, then I good and well better be making sure that I'm not committing the same mistake. It's not hard to understand. So, for the sake of transparency, I want to address a deleted tweet. A deleted tweet. And it happens from time to time. I don't normally delete tweets. When I do delete a tweet, it's normally because I didn't communicate some way in the way that I meant to, or it came out wrong or something like that. I never delete tweets when I think what I said was right, but people just don't like it. In fact, if you've been following me for long enough, you know that I try to tweet I try to talk about stuff that people try to avoid. So I purposefully make myself tweet things that I don't think a lot of people are going to like, not just for the sake of people not liking it, but just so I'm never in a position where I'm just tweeting or sending out messages just because I know it's going to get a lot of likes. And I'll be honest with you, you can talk to other influencers. That can be hard. Once you start getting likes, you start understanding what people want to see, and it's easy to feed into that. It's called audience capture. And so once you start getting likes and all that, you know what they want, you know what type of messages are going to get the most likes, and you start feeding into that. But in turn, it can actually hurt your integrity, right? Because now you're not putting out there what is just truthful and needs to be heard. You're putting out there what people want to hear, right? So if you think about it in the Bible, what happened? Jesus, when his ministry was going very well, what does he do? He gives them that very hard teaching. And when some folks got that hard teaching, they walked away. And I think anybody who's putting messaging, who's putting content out there, has to be willing to tweet things, send out messages that people need to hear, but they may not want to hear. Tweeting things that may not be as popular as you'd like them to be, and may not go viral, but you're doing it because it needs to be heard. So my way of staying out of the lane of being captured by a certain audience is to every now and then tweet things that I think are true, not just to be provocative, but tweet things that probably aren't going to be very popular, right? Just a way of trying to keep myself honest, all right? So I normally don't delete tweets, and I certainly don't delete tweets just because, people have a problem, all right? But about a week ago, the day before Easter, actually, I tweeted out this, and it was a screenshot of a message that the Biden administration sent out. And it said, "Now, therefore, I, Joseph R. Biden Jr., President of the United States of America, by virtue of the authority vested in me by the Constitution and the laws of the United States, do hereby proclaim March 31st, 2024 as Transgender Day of Visibility. I call upon all Americans to join us in lifting up the lives and voices of transgender people throughout our nation and to work toward eliminating violence and discrimination based on gender identity." The last part of that tweet, of that statement, I completely agree with. We need to eliminate violence and discrimination based on gender identity. I'll do anything that I could to support that effort, because that's not okay. People don't need to be bullied. They don't need to be mistreated. They don't need to not get a job, or not be able to go into bank, get housing, or have trouble with banking because of their gender identity. I think that's ridiculous. But as you know, March 31st was Easter. And so I got a text from a friend who is very credible, who I still trust, saying, "Man, can you believe that Biden put this out there and made Easter Transgender Day of Visibility?" And I was like, man, he hit me with it. I was like, man, that's terrible. So I went to the website just to make sure that it was actually had been done, and it was there. And so I'm like, man, this is really bad, right? And so I looked on Twitter. There are a few other people talking about it, some credible folks. And so I tweeted this out along with that screenshot that I just read, which said Trump is selling an American flag Bible, which we talked about last week, that contains the U.S. Constitution. Biden proclaims Easter Sunday as Transgender Visibility Day. Now, on its face, all that stuff was true. Everything I said there was actually true. So you may be saying, well, Justin, why did you erase the tweet? Because upon further investigation and based on what people had said to me that I found to be true, Transgender Visibility Day has always been on March 31st. And so it was a coincidence that it happened to coincide with Easter. All right. So what that meant was that the way that my tweet was stated could be misleading. Now, I still disagree with the way that the Biden administration has handled transgender stuff. I don't think they've handled it at all. I think they've just let the folks on the furthest left do whatever they want to do. I still think it was probably a bad judgment to make that statement on the day that was going to be Easter, especially coming from a Christian president. That's just my opinion. I do think, given that there was a massive study out of the UK that just came out saying that, I think it was like a 15-year study saying that transgenderism in children usually passes, that it's usually just a phase. This is a UK study. And so, the UK has actually taken precautions when it comes to kids getting, sex reassignment surgery, all that the U.S. hasn't. They're a little ahead of us on that. So I think this is an issue that's very novel that we need to handle with great care. And all I see from the Biden administration is we're going to go along with the furthest left folks say, because we don't want the smoke, and we're just going to do whatever they tell us to do. That's basically what I've seen out of it. So I have a massive disagreement with the administration on that issue. Not on the fact that we need to eliminate violence and discrimination. We're on the same page there, but it's the celebration of something that I don't know the president or a lot of people in his administration could actually explain and defend. Right. It's one of those things that if you're progressive, you're supposed to support it. It's a groupthink thing. But most people I've talked to, even very intelligent friends, folks who've gone to law school, who are very, who communicate very well, cannot clearly explain how all this stuff makes sense, because it doesn't make sense. And in the midst of going along with it because we want to be considered progressive, I believe that a lot of children are getting hurt. So what I'm saying right now is I do maintain the disagreement that I have with the Biden administration on this issue. However, the tweet as it was sent could be, based on the information that I have, could be misleading. It didn't acknowledge that Easter and Transgender Day of Visibility were on the same day by coincidence. So for me, it needed to be taken down. But not only did it need to be taken down, I felt like I needed to give my audience and anybody else who wants to listen an explanation as to why it was taken down. Now, is this fun to say I messed up? It's not fun. In fact, it's kind of embarrassing, and I wish I would have taken 10 more minutes before sending it out. As you know, the AND campaign advocates us really doing our homework and looking through everything before we make statements. And I maintain that. So as y'all know, usually when something happens, we don't really comment on it initially because we're trying to gather all the facts. We're trying to make sure that we're not just falling into the popular narrative. And in this instance, I didn't do that. Was the principle of what I said correct? I believe so. Do I still have the same stance? Generally, I do. But when I send something out that could be misleading and make it seem like something that was a coincidence was done purposefully, which I think would have been a lot more disrespectful, I need to come out and say that. So didn't necessarily want to do it, but if I'm going to take pains to do what is right, if the AND campaign is going to hold other people accountable for getting things wrong, then when we get things wrong, and we inevitably will, we need to be willing to be honest about that. So do with that what you will. That's something that I felt I needed to say. But we got to be transparent. We got to have high standards and just admit when we get something wrong. Everybody's going to get something wrong. Admit it, move on. Some people will forgive you. Some people won't. Sometimes the people that don't like you will feel like they won, and you can't be worried about that. You just got to do what's right. I'll be right back on the Church Politics Podcast.
Your eyes on the times, you walk ready to speak up. But with so many problems, you're exhausted trying to keep up.
This is the Church Politics Podcast, where you can get political commentary from a biblical worldview. We're not trying to be conservative or progressive. We're trying to be Christian in the public square.
And I'm black as heaven. I'm made in God's image. Nobody can change my settings. Hey man, got off my knees and put an end to my search. It's easy to sell your soul when you don't know what it's worth.
And I am back on the Church Politics Podcast. Again, it's just Justin Gibney. The Right Reverend is not going to be with me today on this bonus episode, but I hope you appreciate this bonus episode. I hope you appreciate it. The next subject that I want to get into, we just talked about transparency, the importance of having a commitment to the truth, and as the scripture says, taking pains to do the right thing. Next, I want to talk about a young brother named Coleman Hughes, who went onto The View. And I got to give him, some credit. When you don't fit all the elements of, or all the components of, the progressive narrative, going on The View is a very courageous thing to do. Because you can almost be sure that you're gonna get some form of attack. But Coleman Hughes goes onto The View, and he's a writer, thinker. He has a book called The End of Race Politics, and I want you to listen to this conversation that he has on The View, and I'll be right back to give you my thoughts on it.
Reparations. And so your argument for color blindness, I think, is something that the right has co-opted. And so many in the Black community, if I'm being honest with you, because I want to be, believe that you are being used as a pawn by the right and that you're a charlatan of sorts.
He's not a Republican.
So how do you...
He's never voted for a Republican.
You said that you're a conservative.
No.
No, you did. You actually said that in the podcast that you did 2 weeks ago.
I said I was a conservative.
Yes, you did. So, but my question to you is, how do you respond to those critics?
Okay, let's give it. Let him answer.
First thing I think it's very important. The quote that you just pointed out about doing something special for the Negro. That's from the book Why We Can't Wait that I just mentioned.
Yes.
A couple paragraphs later, he lays out exactly what that something special was, and it was the Bill of Rights for the Disadvantaged, a broad class-based policy.
But he also says you must include race.
No, he didn't. He says it's
Yes, he does.
Okay, well, everyone should go read the book Why We Can't Wait. Let's not get sidetracked by that.
Yeah.
I don't think I've been co-opted by anyone. I've only voted twice, both for Democrats. Although I'm an independent, I would vote for a Republican, probably a non-Trump Republican if they were compelling. I don't think there's any evidence I've been co-opted by anyone, and I think that's an ad hominem tactic people use to not address really the important conversations we're having here. And I think it's better, and it would be better for everyone if we stuck to the topics rather than make it about me with no evidence that I've been co-opted.
I want to give you the opportunity to respond to
I appreciate
the criticism.
I appreciate it. There's no evidence that I've been co-opted by anyone. I have an independent podcast. I work for CNN as an analyst. I write for the Free Press. I'm independent in all of these endeavors, and no one is paying me to say what I'm saying. I'm saying it because I feel it.
Wow. The first thing I would say about that short clip is that I think Coleman Hughes handled himself very well. He stayed calm. He kind of took on what came at him. He rolled with the punches and stuck to his message, stuck to what he was trying to say. Now, as you heard, Coleman Hughes believes that we should become, he's making an argument for becoming a colorblind society. And he's not saying that we don't literally see color, but in our policy, color should not be under consideration. All right. Now, on that point, I tend to disagree with him on that point. He makes a very good point, and I agree with him more than a lot of people who are racial justice advocates like myself do. Class is very important, especially when it comes to economics, right? When it comes to economics, considering class is important. And some people think that weakens the racial argument. I don't think it necessarily weakens the racial argument, but either way, it's the truth, right? There are a lot of poor people in this country, and maybe most poor people in this country are white. There are a lot of poor black people in this country. Both need to be taken into consideration. But where I differ with him is that I don't think just on that I don't think that one economic point means that in a society where for hundreds of years racial discrimination was part of the law, that now we can just erase kind of making up for that out of the law. And the reason that I say that is you can even look at what's going on in Tennessee, what's going on with HBCUs all over the country. My wife went to Tennessee State, which is an HBCU, and they're owed millions of dollars. They were underfunded millions of dollars, and they are an HBCU. And so all types of discrimination that we see in the workplace and elsewhere is not just based on class. There is still discrimination that's based on race. And I do think to some extent, he misappropriates what King was saying. King saying that we need to get to the point where we have a colorblind society. I don't think King was saying that we shouldn't consider race at all in any of our laws. I don't agree with Coleman on that. But I will say this, I think he offers his opinion with integrity. I think he's well studied. I just happen to think on that point that he's wrong, even though he has a point on some of the class stuff. Okay. But what we just saw on The View, which in some ways can come to be expected, and I don't want to say this off top. I don't want to pile on Sunny Hostin because that clip has gone viral and she's been piled on enough. So I'll try to not address her specifically because that's not the intent of what I'm trying to say. But what we saw, I think, was a product of a lot of somebody who's very ideological and them not being able to handle when someone doesn't fit their narrative, right? So as soon as he disagrees with her about colorblindness or race, he automatically has to be a conservative. And he's like, I've never said I was conservative. I write for CNN. I'm not a conservative. I just disagree with you. I voted for Democrats or whatever. I just disagree with you. And the fact of the matter is, even if he was conservative, it really shouldn't matter. But she says that because she knows with a certain group of people, her audience, that would automatically discredit him. So instead of attacking his argument in a real way, you see her throwing in some of these things to say, well, I just want to discredit you, right? So she says he's a charlatan. Many people in the black community think you're a charlatan. I don't think many people in the black community know who Coleman Hughes is. He's getting bigger, and I think one day they may know who he is. But most of the black community are not his audience right now. I think he's trying to get there. But to say, a lot of black people think that you've been co-opted and that you're a charlatan. Come on. You could have been better. You would have been better off just saying my circle, me and my circle think that you're a charlatan, right? But again, calling him a charlatan, as he very astutely pointed out, is an ad hominem. Ad hominem means against the man, right? So she's attacking him as a person. She's not attacking his argument, which I think is vulnerable to attack, but she didn't do it. And one thing I wanted that we all should take from that conversation is being able to, regardless of which side we take, being able to see a good argument versus a bad argument. And while I would refute elements of Coleman's argument, his argument was more solid than hers because he did not commit the same logical fallacy that she did of using ad hominems and attacking him really in a baseless way. Saying, well, people feel that you've been, and I'll say this, I do think color blindness has been co-opted by the right. I do not think Coleman Hughes has been co-opted by the right. I listen to the dude. I don't agree with everything he says. He says a lot of things that do make sense, but I listen to him because he's intellectually honest and he is very smart. I just happen to think that he's wrong to a certain extent on this particular point. But what we have to be able to do is say, whether you like Sonny Hostin more or you like him more, who actually had the better argument? He had the better argument, and it shows because he didn't have to resort to the same tactics that I think, shows like The View too often, too often resort to. But why do they resort to them? Because we fall for it. Because we, instead of getting an argument, we're happy with just getting an insult or just hearing ad hominems or just hearing a narrative. But you should be able to see that The View and some of those folks were uncomfortable because he dismantles the narrative. He's a black man that disagrees with the left, just like millions of other black people do. And guess what? When we disagree with the left, it doesn't mean that we're agreeing with the right. And that's what people can't handle. Ideologues are always going to want to throw you on one side or the other. So they can either say you're either all the way our ally and you agree with everything we say, or you're all the way the enemy and I can disregard everything you say. If you're somewhere, not even in the middle, but somewhere just not fitting into one of those two holes, then they don't know how to deal with it because it doesn't fit their framework of how politics should work. It has to be the good versus the bad, and you're either on one side or the other, and there is no room for nuance. And when our sister ran into that dynamic on the show, it made her look really bad because she wasn't making sound arguments. She was resorting to a lot of things that I just don't think were cool. Right, that I don't think add to the conversation. And when we get into these back and forths with people, we have to decide whether we want to be people who are constructive, that are actually going to come up with a solution to help the community, or whether we want to be entertainers. And too often when we get into conversations with people we disagree with on very consequential things, we become entertainers because we want people to say, oh, and ah, or you told him, rather than serious folks who are trying to get to solutions. So I hope we start to look at arguments not based on who we like, but who's actually created a cogent argument that carries the day. All right? Well, I'm glad that you joined me for this bonus episode. For all those that had an issue with any tweet or anything like that, look, we're always going to say what we mean. If what we said didn't come out right because of the poverty of speech, then we'll take it down or we'll make a clarification, and we'll never be above that. As I've always said, nobody is above or below a fair and constructive critique, and that includes me. All right, so that's kind of what this was about. Man, I hope everybody has a good week, and you already know what it is. There's a cross that neither political conservatism nor progressivism is fit to bear. There's a civic hearing in need of faithful witnesses who love social justice and won't surrender the truth to be loved by the world. Politic with the boldness and compassion of Jesus Christ. Until next time, Ann Camp. I'll let you.
Dear Lord.